Hi everyone, I'm Angela. This is Paperbacks Galore, and it is time for everyone's favorite video to film and hopefully watch, which is my best books of 2023. Obviously, this video should really be called my favorite books of 2023, but I think everyone just calls it best books. These are the books that stuck out to me the most because I really connected with them, or I thought they were the best written or the most compelling stories. So there are definitely some other books that I really enjoyed that I read this year that won't make this list, and it was hard to leave some off, but the top like 5 are like really top tier books for me. I'm gonna start with my 10th favorite book, and then at the end I'm going to give some honorable mentions. So my 10th favorite book of the year was Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. This one probably would have been a little bit higher if I would have read this more recently. I read this back in March and April. This is a debut novel about a Southern Black family of women set in the it's set over a period of like 70 years, ranging from like, I think the 60s all the way to like the early 2000s, somewhere in there. There's not a lot of plot points for me to summarize for you guys. It's more of a character-driven novel. We have this family who is escaping domestic violence, and this woman is moving into her ancestral home where her sister and her son live. And so we're seeing flashbacks to different points in their lives. We're getting flashbacks to their mother's perspective. Their mother is like deceased in the present time, but we get to see some of her life. And Tara M. Stringfellow is a poet, so the writing is absolutely beautiful. The setting of Memphis is so vivid, and like the house that they live in, so vivid. It was just like, there's so many stories that are described as like multi-generational family stories, and I'm really a sucker for those, and I always pick them up, but this one was one of the best I've ever read. It was just really well done, really fascinating, original, interesting, all of the positive words I have. My next book is of course a romance, and it's Only When It's Us by Chloe Liese. This was my first Chloe Liese book, and certainly not my last. It was so freaking good. This is essentially a sports romance set at a college, but it's not like too much sports. I'm not really a fan of sports, so the amount that was in there was perfect for me. Our two main characters are students at this university in California. Willa is a student athlete and a soccer star, and Ryder is a former soccer player, now just a student, and Willa doesn't actually know that he used to play soccer. And basically they are seated together in class, and they get paired up for a project, and they actually really don't like each other, especially Willa really doesn't like Ryder. And there's kind of a humorous misunderstanding at the beginning that gets resolved pretty quickly, but Ryder is deaf, and he's like newly deaf, so you're also reading about him like coming to terms with his disability and how he exists in the world and how the world treats him. And then obviously Willa doesn't go on hating him for the whole book, so it's really lovely to see like her perspective on him shift, and just their love for each other is just like, I was kicking my feet. I was so entertained, and also the emotional beats of this story really worked for me. Willa kind of has a very small family unit, and unfortunately her mother is sick with cancer in the hospital, whereas Ryder comes from this really large, boisterous, loud family. And so there's also a bit of a found family aspect as well, as this family welcomes Willa into their home. So this was just so good. I listened to it on audio, and I plan on reading every single book that Chloe Liese releases, but this was just like such a standout, and I'm so happy that I loved it. Next on my list is a book that so many people have been reading this year because the movie came out, and that is of course The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Listen, I, like many others, was a Hunger Games girly back in 2012, 2013. I read the books, I was obsessed with the movies, I probably posted Hunger Games memes onto my Facebook and Instagram all the time, but I haven't really thought much about the books in a really long time, and seeing everyone love the book and the movie this year. I just kind of picked it up on a whim and I was so entertained. If you don't know what it's about, it's basically the villain origin story of President Snow and his basically some of his teenage years in the Capitol and kind of how he got to be where he is today. The way that the world that Suzanne Collins created reflects our own world was really, really interesting, and just hearing President Snow's thoughts and the thoughts that he has, especially about people from different classes, people who have less than him, even though in parts of this book we see that he and his family have very, very little money, and the only thing that really separates him from other poor people is his family name and the fact that he lives in this apartment that's like nice and fancy in the Capitol. So really, really fascinating. I was completely entertained the whole time. I just literally wanted to do nothing but read this book, which is always such a great feeling, and I'm so glad that I got to go back to the world of the Hunger Games with Suzanne Collins again, and yeah, it was great. My next favorite book this year was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is a story of two doctors who work at a hospital together, and they basically start off on the wrong foot. Jacob is new at this hospital, and he is a very anxious man, and he makes a pretty poor first impression on our other main character, Brianna, and in order to clear this up, Jacob writes her a letter. They continue writing letters back and forth to each other, which is really cute, and eventually Jacob asks her to do him a huge favor, which is to fake date him so that his family will get off his back. His family really pities him because his brother ended up marrying Jacob's ex-girlfriend and their wedding is coming up, and he just wants to get his family to leave him alone and stop feeling sorry for him. And obviously Jacob and Brianna develop feelings for each other as they work together and as they kind of play this part of a happy in love couple. I thought the emotional beats to the story were just fantastic. It was so believable. It made me cry. I was literally like surrounded by people at like a function, like reading this book and crying. I just enjoyed every moment of it. I love Jacob so much. He's such a great main character. I really love a main character, like a male main character in a romance who is like really anxious and unsure of himself and like a total softie. So this book was excellent, and I'm happy it exists in the world. I don't know what else to say. Next up, I finally have the physical book to hold up. This is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This won the Pulitzer Prize this year for, I think it was tied with another book called Trust, but this won the Pulitzer Prize, and this is a sad one. This is basically a loose retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, which I haven't actually read, but Charles Dickens was often interested in writing about like institutional poverty and orphans in, I guess, Victorian England. And so Barbara Kingsolver is writing about poverty in Appalachia in America. I don't know if it's Appalachia or Appalachia. People say it differently. I'm going to say Appalachia. Basically, our main character, Demon, has a pretty rough life, and we learn about his childhood. We see him go through different homes within the foster care system, and we see him dream of becoming a successful football player. We see him fall in love. We see his friendships. We see how he survives in this world, and ultimately there's a lot more hope than I was expecting in this book. The main thing that really makes this book so extraordinary is the writing. The writing style, like, it doesn't feel like you're reading a book from Barbara Kingsolver, who is like this, I don't know, I guess she's in her 50s or something. It doesn't feel like you're reading from a 50-year-old American woman's perspective. I guess the main character is American too, but it really feels like you're reading from a man in Appalachia who has been through all of this. Like, it feels like reading a memoir written by this man, but he's fictional, it doesn't exist. So it was absolutely incredible. The writing, I mean, was obviously Pulitzer Prize worthy writing. It was extremely immersive and detailed. Like the details in this book, it's just like this has to be a memoir, right? Like this is a memoir, but it's not. It's fiction. It's not quite like meant to like emotionally manipulate you and like make you cry and make you think that things are okay and then something terrible happens to the character. Like it's not like trying to, you know, get you to cry and get you to be super emotional and just give it 5 stars at the end because you're crying. It's really, really well done and fascinating. All right, now we're getting to the top 5, which are all like kind of like all-time favorites for me, I guess. And Demon Copperhead is a new all-time favorite as well. Next up we have Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is basically a retelling of a Hindu epic, and I have never read the epic itself. And basically we're following Kaikeyi, who is the mother of basically the main guy in this epic. And it's not focused on him, it's focused on her and her childhood and her becoming a queen in another kingdom and her having this really, really interesting family dynamic where she is one of 3 wives and she has a child and then her husband has children with these other women, and the family dynamic was so interesting. Seeing Kaikeyi become the kind of queen who sticks up for other women was really, really fascinating. This is a more introspective fantasy book. It's not like big action and heavy plot and fast pace, you know, moving points. It's really about Kaikeyi's character and her relationship to the society that she lives in and how she handles motherhood, how she handles being a person in power, how she handles being a daughter without a mother. And I just loved it. It was spectacular character work, and I read this for a book club and I probably never would have picked it up if not for that book club, so I'm super thankful for that. Next up we have a book that everyone's been reading this year. It's Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I really, really love Rebecca Ross's writing, and this book is no exception. Think of this book as basically a story of a war between gods in a fantasy world that looks a lot like our world, especially in like a World War I kind of setting with like trench warfare, but there are also gods that we don't really see a ton of. So it almost feels like it's historical fiction, but there's just a splash of fantasy. There's also a really fun like journalism aspect because our 2 main characters are actually rival journalists and they get thrown together. Our main character, what's her name? Iris? I'm really bad with character names. Yeah, Iris and Roman initially are not friends, and they get thrown together through reporting on this war that's going on, and Iris is really drawn to like telling the truth of what's really going on because what's being reported isn't accurate, so they end up going to the war front, and the ending of this book just makes you like need to read the second book. I actually just got the second book delivered to my house today, so I'm super excited to start that. And yeah, this is just a beautifully written book, completely enthralling, and I loved the setting as well. And the found family, there's a really, really sweet found family aspect as well. Next up we have a book that I was really, really hoping would be 5 stars when I picked it up, and it thankfully was, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I had heard of this book and immediately knew that I needed to buy this. I needed to read this and hopefully love it, and I did. This is essentially a modern fantasy incorporating Arthurian legend, urban fantasy, that's what I'm looking for. A contemporary like urban fantasy story, and Arthurian legend plays a really big part in how this world works. There's essentially this secret society of people who are related to the Knights of the Round Table, and our girl, what's her name? Bree. Our main girl, Bree, is essentially a really bright student, and so she's in this program where she gets to go take college classes early. So she's 16, but it's a college setting, which is really, really fun for me. And essentially she gets thrown into this world where there are monsters and threats and sword fighting and a secret society and this big manor house where the secret society kind of has its base in this area of the world in, I think, North Carolina. And so Bree is kind of learning about the history of this society and who she is, and it's just so fun. There's a bit of a love triangle in here. Started losing my voice. There's a bit of a love triangle in here. Bree is a really, really well-written, well-developed character. There's also a surprising amount of commentary about grief in this book, as Bree's mother has actually passed away before the start of this book, and a lot of what she's doing in this book is trying to figure out what happened to her mother. That's kind of how she gets involved in this secret society, and I love it. I love it so much. The second book wasn't quite as much of a success for me, but I have a feeling that the third book is going to be really amazing as well. And I need to reread this because I already forgot some of the details and I want to go back into this world. Coming in at number 2 is a book that I really thought was going to be in my number 1 spot this year, but another book supplanted it, which I love. I love when you have books that are amazing and then you just keep getting more and more amazing books, and that is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. This is the first book in the Veronica Speedwell series. I'm obsessed with these books. Veronica Speedwell is a young woman in Victorian London. She has been living with these 2 spinster aunts of hers. She doesn't have parents, and when her aunts pass away when she's in her early 20s, she decides that she's going to go on an adventure across the world, as she's been doing every so often, because she is a lepidopterist, which means that she studies butterflies. But her travels are interrupted when she's almost kidnapped, and this other man, this Baron, this German man, ends up saving her and whisking her away, and then the Baron himself ends up dead, and she's stuck with this really grumpy guy named Stoker, who does kind of taxidermy stuff. So they're both natural scientists, and they have amazing banter, and they need to find out who killed this mutual friend of theirs. Veronica needs to find out why she was almost kidnapped, and it's just a story of intrigue and adventure and secrets in Victorian London. Veronica is very much extremely independent and intelligent. She likes traveling the world and sleeping with foreign men that she's never gonna see again, and she has very modern views. And Stoker is really, really grumpy but ultimately very kind, and the back and forth that they have is just addicting. So this is kind of a slow burn romance throughout the series. So if you're looking for a mystery book with some romance in it, this one kind of has the start of a romance, but not exactly a full romance arc. I love it so much. There's not many series that I have in my life that are just pure joy when I read them, and whenever I need a pick-me-up, I just reach for another one, and this series is that for me. So yeah, I love it. And coming in at number 1 this year, my favorite book of the year is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I'll also throw in A Fire Endless, which is the second book, final book in the duology. I've read these both this year. It kind of feels like cheating to put them both on the list, but since it's a duology and it's one complete story, it feels kind of weird to take up 2 spots, you know? But essentially, we have this world which is very much I don't know, 17th or 18th century Scotland inspired, very cottagecore vibes. There are these elemental spirits that can change the landscape, and they're very mysterious and elusive and whimsical, and nobody really knows exactly whether they're good or bad, but some people within this world like worship them. And so we have this island called the Isle of Cadence, and half of Cadence is the east and half is the west, and essentially these two sides are constantly, they're enemies. They're like constantly at war with each other, not necessarily like constant battles, but if you cross the border, you're probably going to be either immediately killed, or it means that you are crossing the border in order to steal or harm from the other side. So there's a bit of high stakes and violence there, but a lot of this book is really just like beautiful nature descriptions and descriptions of like herbs and cooking and medicine and the beautiful landscape. I think I already said that. In terms of the plot and characters, so we have this young man named Jack, and he has been summoned back to the Isle of Cadence. He was somewhere else studying at a university. He plays the harp. Is it the harp or the lyre? No, he plays the harp. And he's called back by the laird of the island, or of his side of the island. And when he arrives, he learns that the reason he's been summoned is that the girls on their side of the island are going missing and no one knows what is happening to them. And so he's reunited with his kind of childhood friend slash rival, Adara. And him and Adara have to work together to try to find out what's happening to these young girls. There may or may not be a romance plot. This book is so special to me. I actually started reading this during my wedding slash honeymoon trip, which is not why I like it, but I was kind of like sitting in front of my bookshelves looking at all the books I had, wondering like what book I should take on my honeymoon. And this doesn't really scream like poolside book. I was more planning on taking like a fun, lighthearted romance, but something about this was just like screaming out to me that I needed to read it. So I'm so glad I did. It's really kind of a mix between like Outlander and like more whimsy, less smut, and a lot more magic. And for me, it was just like the perfect story. If you're wondering, A Fire Endless, the paperback came out this year, the hardcover came out in 2022, but I gave this one 5 stars as well. It was an excellent end to the story arc in general, but I will say I probably liked A River Enchanted just a little bit more, but they're both very strong 5 stars and definitely new favorites. Alright, before we go, I just wanted to shout out some honorable mentions of books that weren't quite on my top 10 list but were still 5 stars, really memorable books this year. First is The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, Happy Place by Emily Henry, and Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. Thank you so much for watching my favorites of the year video. I'm so excited for next year. I got a new camera for Christmas. I got a new bigger SD card. I'm so excited to film some vlogs. I'm thinking that my first vlog I ever do is going to be me reading either the first book, my first Robin Hobb book, Assassin's Apprentice, or I'm going to read the Poppy War series, or like 1 or 2 of them. So thank you for watching. Let me know what some of your favorite books were, and I hope you have a lovely week. Bye!